Salamone, the podcast, presents A Lover's Guide to the Never-Ending Apocalypse. Part 3. Video Killed the Racism Star. Joining me later in the show is a contemporary hero of mine, Mr. Benjamin Dixon. Thanks for being here. Welcome to Salamone. I'm Michael Salamone, and this is The Salas Show. This is part 3 of our series, A Lover's Guide to the Never-Ending Apocalypse, and we'll call this, for reasons you'll hear later, Video Killed the Racism Star. We have already discussed in this series fundamentalism and the role of the media military-industrial complex. This week we're going to look at how they use intolerance, racism, xenophobia, and fear to push their agendas even further. We have two opposing death cults aiming to bring about the end of the world, utilizing the greed of arms manufacturers and the once free press that now works for them to push humanity to the brink of perpetual war. The Islamic fundamentalists, on the other side, seek war to bring about the end times in hopes of finding paradise. The arms manufacturers and the media want to continue the decline of humanity and profit from death, poverty, and inequality. All of these parties are intertwined with our government and our government's clandestine services. Now, some of that's bombastic, some of that's generalization, but I'm trying to tie a bow around what we've already spoken about before mentioning that systematic racism is much more sinister than not moving past the tragedies of history. I propose to you, dear listener, that this system of exploitation, dehumanization, economic inequality, straight-up racism, is just another way of furthering an absolutely evil and insane agenda. Throughout this rant at the front of the show, don't be surprised if I mix elements of classism with elements of racism, as I'm prone to do, because people of color are overwhelmingly the victims of economic inequality in our society as well. That's not to say there aren't plenty of poor white folks who fall victim to the power structure. There are. In fact, more than half of all Americans made less than $30,000 this year. However, it's black and Hispanic communities that have the highest levels of pollution, are the most likely to have to rely on Social Security when disabled or elderly. They have the least access to health care, nutrition, and education. When this ally says Black Lives Matter, he also is concerned about these issues. But the issue Black Lives Matter stands for is at the forefront of any social justice-minded person's thoughts these days. What we saw in Chicago with the police murder of Laquan McDonald is nothing short of disgusting. And not just because this man was murdered in cold blood. It's the cover-up. I believe what we're learning here is that there was a massive government conspiracy to cover up the murder of an innocent man, Laquan McDonald. All the way up to the governor, Rahm Emanuel. There's no better example of how institutionalized racism is and how it has a chokehold on this country than when the government conspires to protect a police officer from facing charges. I blame money in politics as usual. Police unions wield too much power, and I'm pro-union. But there's a difference between organized labor fighting for fair working conditions and wages and an industry of buying political influence and rigging the system to put your fraternity above the law, the very law it's supposed to protect and serve. I can't say it enough. It's campaign finance. Regular Americans, who are mostly kind, compassionate, charitable people, lose their voice because those who benefit from institutionalized racism, destroying the middle class, wars, and survival-based consumerism, those who benefit from all of that, they own the politicians. I would argue that we have Bernie Sanders, especially when the polls on the issues show that most Americans support his side of the issues. However, again, more than half of all Americans made less than $30,000 last year, below the poverty line. It's doubtful a majority of Americans are concerned with anything more than survival at this point. That's why movements like Black Lives Matter are so important. Folks are standing up for their survival. And I believe the progressive revolution behind Bernie Sanders is in concert with them. Not just because he has the best social justice platform, but because Bernie's and his burners are shouting, enough is enough. They won't stand by and see Americans treated like this anymore. That's a good revolution to have. But racism and economic injustice are not strictly America's dirty little secrets. Racism and economic injustice are rabid worldwide. I was shocked that it wasn't a larger part of unpacking the attacks on Paris that so many Muslims in France live in ghettos without opportunities for education and employment. You can't talk about any strife in the Middle East without discussing racism. There are sects of Muslims at war with each other. Israel continues to slaughter Palestinians who in return revolt and murder Israelis who in return slaughter more Palestinians over and over. And we've talked about this throughout the series, but Christian fundamentalists want holy war against Islam because they think it'll bring about the second coming of Christ. And fundamentalist Islamics want holy war with the West because it could bring about their end times paradise. This is all rooted in racism and the belief that one culture or race is better than another. This is the type of racism that is destroying our planet, mining blood diamonds in Africa, abusing poor Asian manufacturing workers, exploiting South American agricultural laborers, or just the environmental impact that capitalism without social and moral reins going unchecked destroys the very fabric of society, but also the planet itself. Unchecked capitalism goes hand in hand with economic injustice, which goes hand in hand with racial injustice, and proves to just be one more example of how capitalist fanatics and religious fundamentalists are hell-bent on bringing down humanity. How's that for bombastic? And how does this relate to the beating of war drums? Quite simply, people of color in this country are more likely to serve on the front lines of battle, simply because military service is one of the few outlets poor Americans have to better themselves, when they cannot afford opportunities like college without it. I refuse to support maiming these people or sending them back in body bags just to justify a fundamentalist-based or capitalist-based agenda. That's why so many running for president are capitalizing on our fear and our xenophobia, demonizing immigrants and potential immigrants, the refugees. Their puppet masters want the populace to be afraid of people with brown skin. It makes it easier for our government to topple South American governments and carpet bomb the Middle East. They need American people to go along with it. They can't make money through militarization if all of a sudden the American people become compassionate, empathetic, and moral. End rant. I'm joined this week by a contemporary hero of mine, Mr. Benjamin Dixon. Mr. Dixon is one of my favorite independent broadcasters, and his show, The Benjamin Dixon Show, is one I try not to miss. You can find it every Monday through Thursday on YouTube, Spreaker, and of course through thebenjamindixonshow.com, where you can also learn more about his book, God is Not a Republican, and any other of the great things this good man is doing. Ben, I can't thank you enough for finding some time to chat with me today.
Michael, thanks so much for having me, man. It's definitely my pleasure.
I'm once again talking about systematic racism this week in regards to how economic injustice further fuels it worldwide. Mm-hmm. You've done some very moving work on this issue. I watch a video you made on the subject actually quite often. I want to start by asking you the power structure behind institutionalized racism and the one behind economic inequality. That's the same power structure, right?
To me, yeah, definitely to me. I see the and not just to me, but there's some historical perspective for this, right? So you have during slavery. Well, let me start here. Poor people across the world have something in common, and that is their experience with poverty as well as being on the receiving end of the exploitation of this economic system that we have. This transcends color. This transcends race, nationality. It transcends language barriers. Those people who are, and not just poor, I don't want to limit it to people who are below the poverty line, but even middle class people. We have something in common. We are all, for lack of a better word, exploited by this economic system, particularly the neoliberal iteration of capitalism. And so from that perspective, throughout history, poor white people and slaves, and later on during Jim Crow, poor black people always had something in common, and that was our poverty and the exploitation that we faced. And so one of the number one mechanisms of keeping poor people around the world from uniting, and not even around the world, but particularly inside of the United States from uniting, was racism. Racism was always a tool to keep poor white people from ever seeing the commonalities that they had with poor black people, because if they ever did, then that would be problematic for those with economic power.
One of the things that we're seeing a lot of right now in the media and with especially GOP presidential candidates is the demonization of Syrian refugees. And I think that is a fine example of another form of racism, which is xenophobia. And don't get me wrong, I'm far more concerned about white, right-wing Christian fundamentalist terrorists than I am of Islamic terrorists. The Planned Parenthood shooter here in Colorado shot more people in one day than any of the Islamic refugees coming to America since 9/11.
Wow.
Are white guys like me the real threat to our freedom?
I'm not going to answer that one directly, because there's just so many great sound bites somebody would be able to grab from that and say, but I will say that, based on the statistics, we have, it's more rational for us to be afraid of people named Mike than Ahmed. So maybe we should be afraid of you, Mr. Salamone.
I hope not.
Yeah.
One of the things we have in common is we're both musicians, and you used to play music with Corey Jones, who was just murdered by the police in Palm Beach, Florida.
Yeah.
And now, a year after he was killed, we start to see this massive cover-up behind the murder of Laquan McDonald. Now, I personally believe that Laquan's case is an example of how many of these other names, like Corey's or like Sandra Bland, like so many of the more than 1,033 unarmed civilians as of today killed by police this year. I think it's an example of how many were likely covered up and denied justice.
Yeah.
Now, not all conspiracies are theories. Some are true.
Yeah.
What's your take on that train of thought? Is this an example we're seeing with Mr. McDonald's murder?
Listen, let me put it like this. I think anyone who has, I think everyone can identify with how easy it is for an institution to become corrupt. Just think about your institution, whatever it is, whether it's your family, whether it's your loved ones, whether it's your job. What wouldn't you do to protect your job? What wouldn't you do to protect your family? And you look at the institution of the policing agencies across the nation, they consider themselves a family. They are a strong unit. They have their own culture, their own code, their own credo. And so it should only follow that they would be willing to do things to protect that institution that sometimes borderline criminal, but then other times just crush right through that line and absolutely are criminal. And I think what we're seeing is just the ability to two things: to capture it more because of cell phone cameras and social media. We can get it out much quicker, but then also the political pressure that's being put on from every corner of the United States. So now they can't get away with it as easily. We're still in a stage where they're getting away with it, right? We haven't seen any convictions over the last year.
Right.
We've seen some indictments, and then we've seen non-indictments, but no convictions. But it's becoming more increasingly difficult for them to get away with it as easily as they did. So it is an indictment against the police in the sense that they carry themselves in a manner that can cross criminal lines, with regard to how they protect their institution. And I'm not trying to vilify them as much as help people to understand how easy it is for people to fall into that trope of trying to protect their turf and trying to protect their friends and trying to protect their family and their career. So I don't think we should be surprised that police officers engage in criminal activity in order to cover up their behavior. I think we just need to understand the perspective and hold them to a higher standard.
Thank God for cell phone video. I mean, video killed the racism star. But citizen journalism is such a valuable tool to modern society and opening our eyes. And you got me thinking in a different direction. Mm-hmm. In another area that you and I tend to agree on, money and politics, mm-hmm. Police unions are so well funded and so powerful. They can corrupt the system of justice to, as you mentioned, protect their fraternity. Mm-hmm. They can buy politicians. They can buy public officials. Mm-hmm. And as you said at the top, people of poverty and people of color are more inclined to be victims of that kind of justice. Yeah. Justice in quotes system. Do you think that police unions have a role to play in this?
I mean, absolutely. Every time you see something happen, the first people that come out and say the most insidious and ridiculous things are the presidents of the police unions. They are I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't know about the unions themselves, right? But the presidents that have opened their mouths in response to much of the activity that we're seeing on the national level, they have been despicable and disgusting. They have an extreme amount of power, far more power than they should. They are highly funded and they are very politically active, so they are a power force to be reckoned with, and it goes contrary to the normal relationships that you would believe a union would have, because they completely align with Republican ideologies. Even if it's a blue state, right, like New York, the New York City Police Union, and they are completely conservative in their ideologies, and that's because of the conservatism's natural propensity to lean towards quote unquote law and order, mm-hmm. which generally means suppress and, well, let me just leave it there.
No, it's a fine point, and the mainstream media is always apologizing and excusing and helping mm-hmm. to distort the innocence of victims, like saying Sandra Bland was on pot or some bullshit. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they're quick to defend people like Dylan Roof or this Planned Parenthood shooter, right? Saying he oopsed his way into the clinic, which thankfully was soon debunked by the FBI. Mm. There's another group of disenfranchised that are always under attack. Women. Mm-hmm. Women are involved in the social justice struggle. And transgender folks. You never see in the media how many trans women have been killed this year.
Right. Yeah, that's something that Black Lives Matter in particular has been focusing on. And I've, though I'm not a representative of Black Lives Matter, I'm an observer of theirs. And I've noticed over the years that they have slowly but surely begun incorporating, and actually, let me correct myself, not really slowly but surely, but with a very definitive voice incorporating other marginalized groups, the LGBT community, and then special emphasis on trans lives, because a lot of times we don't hear about those stories at all. And they are definitely not only marginalized, but they are victims of brutality on an alarming scale. So it's really the season for marginalized voices to unite, because an observation that I made a long time ago, and it came to me because of a friend of mine who's an artist, and I haven't spoken with him in almost a year and a half. Colin, I have to reach out to him. Maybe he listens to your show. I know your show is really popular, so maybe Colin is listening to the show. But he said that we need to have solidarity with all things positive. And from that, my brain put together the fact that racism is classism, is sexism, is xenophobia, is homophobia. It's all the same hate, but it's experienced by different people and expressed in different ways. But it all comes from the same bigoted root of hatred and fear. And so, our fight, even though I'm not trans, I have common cause with trans people. Even though I'm not gay, I have common cause with gay people. Even though I'm not a woman, I have a common cause with women all across the world, because if we attack this thing on different angles, if we all fight the battle wherever that battle is, whether it's in women's issues, whether it's in trans issues, in gay LGBT issues, wherever the fight is, by attacking it there, I'm also attacking it where it hits me. So we can't be blind. We can't be silent when it crosses someone else's intersection that we don't live on, because if we don't, we've missed an opportunity to attack that same bigoted root of hatred and fear.
I think you just nailed the the actual intersection of intersectionality, as we talk about it when it comes to racism, the economics of racism, or in perpetuating the devaluation of any people, in my opinion, is probably stronger than the actual hatred, from blood diamonds to human trafficking to sex workers.
Yeah.
It's all about dollars, not ideology. I want to read a quote here. This is a historian, Eric Williams, who wrote, "Slavery was not born of racism. Rather, racism was the consequence of slavery."
Yeah.
Meaning that hundreds of years of this systematic disenfranchising of culture left African Americans and other cultures vulnerable to economic plight. And I think that means the root of this all is greed. Capitalists exploit to make a buck. Do you feel where I'm going?
No, I'm with you 100,000%. If you could send me that quote as soon as we're done talking, I would love to read it in its entirety, in its context, because again, like we stated earlier, it really is an economic thing. It is, racism is the easiest tool to keep, and even if we, people get scared off because we say racist, right? So even if we could label it bigotry, and then people get scared, chased off because of bigotry, xenophobia, but it's that latent gene in each and every one of us. We all have this propensity to be untrusting of someone that's not like us, and to make stereotypes because they're not like us, and then to have a fear of them because they don't like us. And then those natural traits that are human nature cause us to act out in ways that are bigoted, that are racist, and to say things that are bigoted and are racist. But racism and bigotry, they are the easiest tools to keep people voting against their best interests, right? If I can always dislike and distrust minorities and feel like Mexicans are taking my job, all the while that'll keep me from ever realizing that no, my job was shipped overseas about 20 years ago. It's never coming back, not because of the Mexicans, but because globalization, because of exporting our jobs, outsourcing rather our jobs. And so as long as they can keep us focused on the Mexicans, right, they'll never have us focus on the policies of neoliberal capitalism that absolutely has taken our jobs and shipped them overseas to the lowest slave labor state that we could find.
Amen. It's the marginalizing of people that props up the power structure.
Absolutely.
Speaking of the establishment, Hillary Clinton and the Republicans are both calling for what's likely to be a never-ending war on terror. Bernie Sanders is calling for a war on poverty. Do you agree that every Christian person, every compassionate person, every progressive, we need to pick a side here?
Yeah, I wish it was that clear, Michael. I really wish it was that clear of a choice in the minds of people who haven't already made that choice, right? You have people who their minds are clouded and they're so in love with Hillary Clinton, for whatever reason. I have not found a single person who can tell me why they are in love with Hillary Clinton in a meaningful, substantive, progressive way. Right. Everyone who supports Hillary Clinton has always shifted to the right of Bernie Sanders. And that generally means less progressive, less compassionate, more war hawkish, more, just things that are counter to what we have believed for a very long time. I wish they could see that their decision to support Hillary Clinton is actually a decision to support the status quo, the establishment, as you called it. And but unfortunately, I don't think they're able to see past whatever it is that has had them held to Hillary Clinton.
I made the joke today that every time a Clinton supporter tries to explain their rationale to me, all I hear is "Hail Hydra."
Hail Hydra, absolutely. It's like, and the bad thing about it, if we can just go with that analogy, man, the bad thing about it is they are supposed to be the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. They're supposed to be right there with us, or they are right there with us. And I'm finding more and more often we have a lot of conservatives in progressive skins. I mean, you can't be willing to attack universal health care and really believe that you are a progressive. And that's my number one gripe with Hillary supporters. I'm like, you know what? If you want to support her, absolutely, that's your freedom, that's your prerogative, but don't try to redefine what progressive means for you to be able to support her. Because by doing that, you're shifting America further and further to the right. Just say that you believe that she's a great moderate and you love what she is, and you love what she stands for, and you're excited about having a woman president. Say those things. Hell, I'm excited about having a woman president. I just wished it was Elizabeth Warren.
Amen. Amen. And back to her pushing for perpetual war again, it's no coincidence that poor people and people of color, they're the ones most likely to be on the front lines of any perpetual war on terror. The ruling class, I guess, thinks certain lives are disposable, but I hope that it's the ruling class that is. Anyhow, Ben, before we sign off, do you have any final thoughts on this topic you want to share?
I mean, there's so many things to talk about in this regard. I would just encourage all of your listeners to definitely make sure they're registered to vote, and vote during the primary, and vote for your best interest. A lot of people try to make it seem as though you shouldn't vote for what's in your personal best interest, all the while they're voting for their best interest. I completely disagree with that. Identity politics has its place, and I think if someone is going to better serve your needs, vote for that person, and make sure you do it during the primary. I just happen to believe that it's Bernie Sanders. Listen, we could talk all day long about these politics, but I really want to thank you for bringing me on, man. It's been a pleasure.
Well, my thanks to the great Benjamin Dixon for spending some time with us, and of course to you, dear listener, for tuning in. I believe the popular vernacular of the day is stay woke.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
If you don't already, be sure to go to thebenjamindixonshow.com and follow all of the great things Mr. Dixon is doing. Follow him on Twitter at the BPD Show, and you'll be glad you did. I am. Next week we'll continue on with this Lover's Guide to the Apocalypse series with an installment I'll call Mother Earth Blues. That's for all three of you Heart fans out there. Until then, I'm Michael Salamone asking you to please be good to one another.
Yeah.
Cheers. Salamone is a podcast taped live for a streaming internet audience. Find episodes and archives on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, all of the places you get podcasts these days, and of course at michaelsalamone.com. I really think you should subscribe.